Hello, can you hear me now? This is Gallifrey calling. This is the Scowled. Yes, you can hear me. Good. Let's get started, shall we? First of all, know that this fandom is under my protection as per Article 57 of the Shadow Proclamation. Don't test me. That said, here's some ground rules. Listen to what I'm actually saying. Listen to the arguments that I'm actually making, and argue back against those arguments should you wish. Do not fight arguments that I am not making. Understood? Don't strawman. Don't fight battles that don't exist. Listen. Sit down, shut up, open your ears, and listen and absorb before you reply or say anything. Thank you. So the new Doctor is going to be a woman. This was always going to be controversial. Every new regeneration is controversial. Every new regeneration is met with criticism and cries of disaster and not my Doctor. This is nothing new. However, because this regeneration has a vagina, all of these criticisms and things that are par for the course and run-of-the-mill are being reframed as misogyny, as tends to happen very often. In fact, I have seen very, very few people actually concerned by the fact that it's a woman, per se, even though that's a relatively new innovation that's only really been mentioned in series, at least, since around 2010, 2011, and then thoroughly hinted at leading up to this. But that's not actually what people are upset about, past a handful of misogynists and a whole bunch of trolls. The response to this imagined outrage that it's a woman is far bigger than any actual outrage that it's a woman, and this is a strangely familiar pattern, isn't it? Do we remember Ghostbusters? How all the criticism and concern about that was reframed as misogyny, and how did that turn out? Not very well at all. It was shit. People's criticisms were valid, people's concerns were valid. Dismissing them as misogyny and marginalising them only drove them away into the hands of these more conservative and regressive voices in the culture war. So not only did you end up with a shit film by not listening to people, but you drove a whole bunch of people into the arms of your enemies. This was not a good idea, was it, you pathetic moronic prick? And you see, that is what has so thoroughly fucking pissed me off this time around again. Fans deserve to be treated better. They care about this property, they care about it deeply. This is art, this is culture, this is the kind of thing that people should be concerned about. And they have legitimate concerns. And all of those legitimate concerns are simply being written off as misogyny yet again. It's pathetic, it's stupid, it's fucking infuriating. That is what is pissing me off about this whole thing. People have some legitimate concerns, some of which I share, and which I'll talk about in a minute. But they're not being listened to. Again, they're just being written off as misogynists. And it's just... they deserve better, yeah? Fans can be infuriating, fans can be annoying, fans can want things from shows that don't make any sense. They can want things from other properties that don't make any sense. You have to have confidence in your own creation and go forward, but you still have to respect the fans, even if you don't necessarily respect what they want. You know, they care about what you do, and so they deserve to be treated better than this. That's what's pissing me off. The way everyone's just writing it off as misogyny when that isn't what it is at all. That is what has me infuriated and angry and furious. And it's the same pattern we've seen over and over again. Ghostbusters. Gamergate. You know, there was rampant corruption, creeping and increasing censorship that's still ongoing, particularly with reference to Japanese games. But no, we can just write it all off as misogyny, and then we just have to ignore it, and everything will be hunky-dory. Only that's not how it turns out. And by reframing people's arguments in that way, by treating them like shit, by talking down to them in that way, by projecting arguments onto them that they have never made, things that they have never done, you just drive them away into the arms of your enemies. Don't do it. So, what are these legitimate concerns then? The fact that it's a woman really makes no odds. She might be good, she might be bad. They've done similarly radical changes in the past. Switching to young, pretty doctors was a pretty radical change. Switching from serials to episodes was a pretty radical change, I would say, to the detriment of the series as a whole in that case. You know, and then switching back to an older Doctor became controversial. You know, people have been upset about all these things, and they've all been risks to take, whether moving from old Who to new Who, or bringing in Capaldi as an older Doctor again. You know, these were all risks. They're all problems. Not all of them necessarily paid off. This is another risk with a property that people care very deeply about, and they are worried, understandably I think, about the future of that property in the context of this kind of thing happening. Because cramming a woman in there arbitrarily for no particular reason, for all that they have been leading up to this and hinting at it, reeks of performative progressivism, or virtue signalling, as you might otherwise like to call it. Some people are turned off from that term. You know, it feels arbitrary. And this is especially true in the context of what's been going on. Doctor Who has ironically become rather historically revisionist, and given the BBC's remit is to be educational, not re-educational, this is a little bit concerning. You know, just throwing minorities in there for the sake of it doesn't work, and it's a disservice to those minorities. Not that women are a minority, they're a majority. But, you know, this is still a concern. Like I say, it's contextual. This last season was actually pretty good, but there have been instances within it of this historical revisionism I'm talking about, around the most recent companion, tragic end as she may have had. But this isn't new for Doctor Who. It's been happening for a while. Oh, let's make Shakespeare gay. That's a wild, out there, crazy, on the edge theory. Let's just do it for no particular reason. Captain Jack worked out, but he was another example of this. But that it can work out. It might work out in this instance. The point is merely that it is a legitimate cause for concern, because when casting and other aspects of series become box-ticking exercises, well, we need a gay, blind, spastic, Pakistani in a wheelchair, lesbian, transgender character, and that'll tick all the boxes. What do? Yeah, just sit there. You know, that's hyperbolic, but you see the point. Just, it's concerning and worrying. Look at what's happened to Marvel. They have really pushed this hyper-progressive agenda. They have altered a whole bunch of stuff they didn't need to. They could have brought in new characters. That would have been a better way to go about things, probably. And it's harmed their sales, and Marvel's executives have admitted it. People have entered into apologia about this, but yeah, that's the state of affairs. And it's happened with other series and other properties as well. So this is a concern. The concern isn't, oh, I don't want darkies, or I don't want women, or whatever in my series. It's that this is often indicative of laziness, of box-ticking exercises, of a substitute for genuine creativity, of a, hey, look at me, look how progressive I am, rather than concentrating primarily on telling good stories and making a good show, right? It's very easy to deflect that into misogyny or racism or homophobia or whatever else, but that's not true. And frankly, minorities and unconventional characters deserve better than to just be crammed into something for the sake of it. Now, we don't know whether that's going to be the case or not, but it is a legitimate cause for concern. Another concern, and this is probably the one that's the chief concern from my point of view, is that changing the Doctor in this way will inevitably change the story dynamic. You know, Doctor Who really kind of, despite the younger Doctors being brought in, really kind of rotates around this kind of fatherly, professorial character, with the younger, more naive companion as a way of explaining things to the audience. That's always been the way, and it is, like it or not, a rather male archetype. One that's incredibly rare on TV at the moment, and has been for some years. We'll get to that in a sec. But the whole story dynamic throughout all the other changes has always revolved around that. Now, if this is just a gender swap, then you can retain that dynamic, though I think an older woman would have been much better, if that's what you're going for. yeah, if it's just a gender swap and the Doctor remains entirely and exactly the Doctor, that's not so much of an issue from a story perspective. But then, what was the point swapping the gender? It doesn't fit the trope as well. It can still continue, but it doesn't fit the trope as well. And tropes exist for a reason. They're kind of like shortcut hacks for ways of storytelling. Particularly important with shorter fiction and episodic stuff like the Doctor, I guess. Unless you view the canon as a whole, but still. So that it's playing with fire to change that line of unity that's run through all the other changes, and it could very, very fundamentally change the way that the stories are told. So if you keep the Doctor as is, he just happens to have tits, that's less of a risk to the story, but then what's the point? And we've seen plenty of arguments against that kind of, just gender swapped character. It's a big criticism of the strong female archetype that's been used in other things. Oh, well, we'll just make it the same as the male action hero, or whatever the case might be. It's just that they happen to have a vagina. A lot of feminist critics of media don't think that is a good approach. When they see a woman in a lead, they want her to be a woman. Never mind all the paradoxes around that and self-contradictions and so on. There's a certain kind of sense to the underlying point there, even if the theory is bollocks. So if you have a female Doctor, you should be wanting to tell more, for want of a better term, feminine stories. But then if you do that, you're fucking with the dynamic, and you're putting the series and its story dynamic and its all of that at risk. That's my concern. But we've seen how good writing can elevate a bad Doctor, and bad writing can ditch a good Doctor. Capaldi was a good Doctor, but until this last season, the writing that he was being given to perform was pretty terrible and dragged the whole series down. So a lot depends on the writing regardless, but still, such a fundamental change to the story dynamic, the character dynamic, is a risk, and that is a cause for legitimate concern. There's plenty of other concerns that I think are legitimate, but I'm just going to give you one more. The loss of a really unconventional male role model. A compassionate talker, thinker who runs away is an very unusual male archetype, at least to be found in media. I don't normally put too much stock in the idea of media role models and so on, but Doctor Who has been going on for so long and has such a massive cultural footprint, I think there's a degree of significance that does not exist in other instances. So you're taking away a really important, really unconventional, really alternative model of masculinity in the form of the Doctor, one that I very much like, one that I very much approve of, and one that is increasingly rare. We have issues, we have problems around the fact that most male characters on TV these days are either grunting he-men or bumbling idiots. A certain degree of bumbling idiocy has come into Doctor Who, as they've Mary sued a lot of the companions, unfortunately. But this loss is important. If you're arguing on the basis that role models are important and you want little girls to have a role model in the Doctor, then you're opening yourself up to the point that the Doctor is a really important role model for boys. If you're going to argue that boys can look up to a female Doctor, then why can't little girls look up to a male Doctor? You see, all these arguments around role models and so on just end up being self-defeating. But there really is a lack of this kind of positive, intellectual, compassionate male role model in media these days. There used to be a lot more. They're gone for the most part, and it's unfortunate. I know people are going to raise objections and point to other characters from other series, but I don't think there's anything really like the Doctor. There are Doctor-like female characters. It's pretty much the number one standard trope of female characters in crime dramas. to have that. But for men, it's incredibly unusual, and it's a genuine loss. And if your argument is that you want boys to have more compassionate, more touchy-feely, more intellectual role models, then you're shooting yourself in the foot by removing one of the biggest, most important ones that exists. You're removing a key tool for providing that kind of role model to young boys. So to end, I'm just going to reiterate. People have legitimate concerns. Writing them off as misogynists isn't accurate, isn't going to work, it's just going to drive them away and make them reactionary. It's going to turn them into the kinds of people that you think they are, because they are going to be unable to stand you, and they're going to view every slightly progressive move you make with increasing suspicion. Right? For this to work, it has to overcome many of the same hurdles that choosing Matt Smith did. He was completely off for the role, or at least seemed to be, but the writing and the effort and his talent managed to make the difference. All of that's going to have to come together here, but twice as much, 3 times as much. Not because it's a woman necessarily, but because of all the stuff all around it, and it's that fundamental of a change. Talk to people, engage with their actual arguments. Do that. Don't just write everyone off as misogynists. Ignore trolls. Treat the fans better. They deserve better. Zang.